upgrading the firmware on Olympus and OM System cameras might not be possible using OM WorkSpace on macOS operating system after applying the latest macOS updates. So this is due to security enhancements associated with the macOS updates. So the recommendation is to upgrade your camera firmware before updating macOS. Also, OM System has released an update for OM WorkSpace for macOS. So perhaps this is also worth updating now after upgrading the firmware on your camera, just to make sure you have the latest firmware on your camera before you proceed. And OM System has released firmware updates for the OM Mark II. So OM Mark II will be on version 1.1. And there's also a firmware update for the original OM1. So that will go to version 1.6, as well as the OM5 will go to version 1.2, and the TG7 will move to version 1.1. So the OM1 Mark II will have operational stability improvements as well as security over Wi-Fi changes, and the changes are identical to the original OM1 as well. The OM5 only gets improved stability of operation of the camera, and OM System doesn't specifically mention what the stability improvements to the operation of the camera is, so I just assume it's some bugs that have been fixed now. And the TG7 camera will only add support for the latest model of a particular memory card. There was an interview with the OM Systems Vice President for Brand Strategy and Product Planning, Kazuhiro Togashi, and there wasn't any new information in that interview. So there was some reiteration that OM System will focus on outdoor, adventure, and wildlife photography. And they did mention that the emphasis was on photography as opposed to videography. Although there was a mention of video recording briefly, stating that they intend to have more user-friendly functions for video recording and editing. And in particular, they want to enable video editing without requiring expensive equipment. So I don't know whether that means in-camera video editing functionality or whether they're just referring to having picture profiles for 10-bit video recording, which you currently don't have, so that you can actually have a finished 10-bit recorded video from the camera and not require color grading as part of post-processing. There's a German blog that's written about the OM1 Mark II, and one of the things they mention is that in addition to the larger buffer, which the OM1 Mark II has, there's also a change in the memory which works between the preprocessor and the processor. So that's changed the memory type to a faster type, which is twice as fast apparently, and that also produces a lot of heat in the camera, which wasn't the case previously. So the internals of the camera has been changed to deal with that additional heat. So the heat management part of the camera has been changed, and hence the motherboard design of the camera has changed slightly. And also they mentioned that there's a new LCD screen, which is more energy efficient on the OM1 Mark II as opposed to the original OM1. So that's an interesting thing which I didn't know about. And I'm just assuming maybe the company that provides the screen has done some improvements to that same LCD screen to make it more energy efficient. And they might have discontinued the old model, so it's just a replacement of those things. But it's good to know about these improvements because I don't remember OM System explicitly mentioning these improvements. Another thing mentioned on that same blog website, but in a different blog post, is that the autofocus on the OM1 Mark II is worse than the OM1. So one thing is the subject detection and all the AI features, which is obviously improved on the OM1 Mark II, but the actual focusing seems to be worse on the OM1 Mark II than it is on the original OM1. And in my personal experience, I would say even on the original OM1 is worse than it was on the EM1 Mark III, the EM1X, and the EM5 Mark III. So another interesting thing which I mentioned previously is that the OM1 Mark II uses intelligent eye detection, whereas on the previous cameras you could choose whether you wanted the camera to focus on the left eye, the right eye, or the eye closest to the camera. And those options no longer exist on the OM1 Mark II. So on this same blog, the person has mentioned that intelligent eye detection tends to recognize the eye which is further away from the camera, because the AI algorithm that the camera has been trained on have used East Asian eyes. So therefore the smaller eyes which is further away from the camera is the one which will gain focus as opposed to the eye which is closest to the camera. So that's quite a disadvantage because the eye which is further away from the camera will not be on the same focal plane as the face of the subject. So that means focus will be a little bit off. So I think in some senses, since OM System has taken over Olympus camera division, they've gradually made some of the things worse, even though they've improved in some areas. And it was also mentioned that the OM Mark II camera has the same exact model number as the original OM1, which is IM027. So I think that's interesting in the sense that there hasn't been any significant changes to the underlying hardware. Another thing I came across was that one of the Olympus brand ambassadors on YouTube openly mentioned that they received the OM1 Mark II for free, as well as the 150 to 600 millimeter lens, in addition to a financial payment for the review of the new camera and lens. And I think all the different camera brands do have some sort of agreement with the different YouTubers and people who blog about cameras with similar terms and benefits. And I think this is one of the things that I get criticized on, why I, for example, mention problems about different cameras. But one of the reasons I guess I do that is because the majority of people who report on cameras don't actually mention any of the problems. And because they have a financial incentive to promote the product and promote sales, whether that's through receiving free products from a camera manufacturer or receiving money through affiliate links or receiving advertisement money from YouTube. All of those things will essentially drive the behavior of people to promote the sales and be positive about something. Because if you, for example, create a negative video about a particular object, and it doesn't matter what product it is, it's just an object. We're not talking about another human being or anything with feelings, it's just an object. The YouTube algorithm will not promote that particular video. So even the advertisement money that the YouTubers will receive from that video will be less. And that's why you see that everything is always on YouTube is very positive and you don't actually receive clear and transparent information about any of the products. I saw one YouTuber who is actually really popular and he was talking about I think it was the Sony A7 IV, and he was saying how the battery lasts the whole day, but you clearly see in his video that he's actually has it connected to a V-mount battery, and he said he spent the day recording with this and the battery didn't run out. But there's obviously a discrepancy between what he says and what he's actually doing. So if the battery didn't run out, he wouldn't have a V-mount battery connected to it in the first place. So Panasonic has made some improvements to autofocusing, and a lot of that was available on the new G9 Mark II. And there's been firmware updates for the S5 II and S5 IIX, and they've improved autofocusing options, stabilization, and enabling proxy recording. So it would be interesting to see whether any of these changes will be ported across to the GH6, because for video work, there isn't a better camera than the GH6 yet, as the G9 Mark II is more geared towards photography, so it doesn't have a fan and it will overheat in certain conditions. So personally, I would really like to see those improvements get carried across to the GH6, because one of the cameras that I do use is the Panasonic Lumix GH6. In particular, I'm interested in the stabilization improvements, because when I use the GH6, the stabilization doesn't look anywhere near as good as what I get on Olympus cameras such as the EM1X, OM1, EM1 Mark III. There's a new kit lens for the Panasonic Lumix GH5 Mark II. So it's the 14 to 140 millimeter f3.5 to 5.6 Mark II. So this lens also has optical stabilization, and you should be able to purchase this lens as part of a package when you buy the GH5 Mark II. So that's just an additional option to purchase the GH5 Mark II with a different lens.